Evening. Sorry about that, Ron. I should have told you I'm not using PowerPoint. If you open your Bibles this evening to the book of Habakkuk, in the book of Habakkuk, there's an old, pretty bad preacher joke about that. About the old-time preachers, they'd be asked, how do you say that? And one old-time preacher said, well, it's Habakkuk, like tobacco. They were a different character. No, after the Wednesday night class, I got thinking about the book of Habakkuk. I think the book of Habakkuk is actually a rather timely study, considering the things that we see go on in this world. I'm sure you all can think of several events that have happened in the past few weeks that make us wonder about just where this world is going. And we have, it used to be, school shootings were they were seldom. Columbine stands as a stark landmark in most of our memories as being a break. But yet, just alone this year, there's been more than I can count with my two hands. We look at how politics has gotten. No longer is it civil discourse, but who can go down to the lowest and be the most corrupt and who can throw the most mud. We look at the world. I mean, just this week in Ireland, which had a constitutional amendment to their constitutional amendment for 25 years, abortion was illegal in that country. And this past work, they overturned it. So, and it can be very easy for us to turn around and ask the same question that Habakkuk does in the first chapter here. The oracle which Habakkuk the prophet saw. I want to pause there real quick. If you have footnotes, it's interesting that the oracle there, an altered translation could be burden. The burden which Habakkuk saw. And it very much was a burden for Habakkuk because the time in which he is prophesying is a time of great immorality and injustice and corruption in the world. Turn with me to 2 Kings for a moment. Put a bookmark there in Habakkuk because I understand how hard it can be to find. That's why I have my bookmark there. But turn me to 2 Kings. And we get a feel for the time period and the era that Habakkuk's living in. 2 Kings chapter 23. So Israel's just gone through the reign of Josiah. They've just gone through that reign. The Passover has been reinstituted. The nation has repented and turned back to God. The reforms are taking place. They're restoring the temple. They're restoring the feast. They're worshiping God as they should. But that's not the time period Habakkuk's prophesying. He's prophesying during the time of Jehoaz, the successor to Josiah. Homer Haley aptly put it, the time in which Habakkuk's prophesying can be summarized in one sentence, and that is verse 32. Regarding Jehoaz, it says there, he did evil in the sight of the Lord according to all that his fathers had done. Undid all the reforms. Turned the nation back to the sinful path. Turned the nation back to idolatry. And it's a reminder that all that his fathers had done would include all the wicked kings that proceeded before him. Going back to the book of Habakkuk. He says there in verse 2, how long, O Lord, will I call for help, and you will not hear? I cry out to you violence, yet you do not save. Why do you make me see iniquity and cause me to look upon wickedness? Yes, destruction and violence are before me. Strife exists and contention arises. Therefore the law is ignored, and justice is never upheld. For the wicked surround the righteous. Therefore justice comes out perverted. During this time period, the poor and those less fortunate in Israelite society, they were being milked and nickel and dime for everything they had. The courts were exceedingly crooked. Justice was unable to be had through their system. And Habakkuk's first question, really the outline of this book is Habakkuk has two questions, and God has two answers, which Habakkuk must eventually come to accept. And that first question is, how long are you going to stand by and do nothing? I think we all be lying if we said we have not asked that question at some point in our lives. How long is this going to go on? How long is this wickedness going to go unpunished? God's first answer there starts in verse 5. God is not indifferent to what's going on. God is not simply on the sidelines as watching this all play out and not caring or not moving to act. He says to the prophet, "Look among the nations, observe, be astonished, wonder, because I am doing something in your days you would not believe if you were told. For behold, I am raising up the Chaldeans, that fierce and impetuous people, who march throughout the earth to seize dwelling places which are not theirs. They are dreaded and feared. Their justice and authority originate within themselves. Their horses are swifter than leopards and keener than wolves in the evening. Their horsemen come galloping, their horsemen come from afar. They fly like eagles swooping down to devour. All of them come from violence. Their horde of faces moves forward. They collect captives like sand. They mock kings and rulers, a laughing matter to them. They laugh at every fortress and heap up rubble to capture it. Then they will sweep through like the wind and pass on. But they will be held guilty, they whose strength is their God." So God gives the answer to Habakkuk, I'm not just sitting by and doing nothing. Judgment will come. Wickedness is going to be punished. But I'm going to do it by the hand of the Chaldeans. I'm going to do it by these wicked pagans. And this is where we get Habakkuk's second perplexity, his second question. His response almost is, that's not the answer I was looking for. I don't want that. Look what he has to say. "Are you not from everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We will not die. You, O Lord, have appointed them to judge, and you, O Rock, have established them correct. Your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look on wickedness with favor. Why do you look with favor on those who deal treacherously? Why are you silent when the wicked swallow up those more righteous than they? Why have you made men like the fish of the sea, like creeping things without a rule over them? The Chaldeans bring all of them up on the hook, drag them away with their net, and gather them together with their fishing net. Therefore they rejoice and are glad. Therefore they offer a sacrifice to their net, and burn incense to their fishing net. Because through these things the catch is large, and their food is plentiful. Will they therefore empty their net, and continually slay nations without sparing?" Habakkuk is saying back to God, do you not know how wicked these people are? Do you not know how evil they are? How is it that you're using them? How can you, a righteous God, use evil? A few little notes here about what Habakkuk's referencing here. Verse 15, they bring them all up with the hook and drag them away in their net and gather them together in their fishing net. See, the Chaldeans and much of these punishers that God would send, they had a practice. I don't see too many of these nose rings anymore, but the nose ring that used to be actually through the middle of the nose, that was quite popular. And what the Chaldeans would do, they would put such a ring on most of their captives, and they would attach them to a chain. And then that's how they'd lead them astray. You have this very fragile piece of cartilage being pierced against their will and being used as the leash, basically. And at any moment, one of the Chaldean captors could just yank on it if they so choose. They would come by and they would capture and drag people away with their nets. Habakkuk's very plain with that. But these people were brutal. Absolutely brutal. And so Habakkuk's kind of perplexed at this. His first question is, are you going to do nothing? And God says, no, I'm going to do something. Wickedness is going to be punished, but it's going to be the Chaldeans. And Habakkuk just goes, you can almost hear the record scratch and the freeze frame happen, and he goes, what? They're wicked. Verse 13. He's saying to God, your eyes are too pure to approve evil, and you cannot look upon wickedness with favors. So then, why are you doing this? The entire second chapter is meant to be a comfort to Habakkuk and the people, because God is not condoning their actions. God's using them for His purposes, and they'll get theirs. It is God who has raised them up, but as of them, their deeds are of themselves. God's response here in chapter 2. First, it starts out with the prophet speaking. I will stand on my guard post and station myself on the rampart. I will keep watch to see what he will speak to me and how I may reply when I am reproved. Then the Lord answered me and said, record the vision and inscribe it on tablets, that the one who reads it may run. For the vision is yet for the appointed time. It hastens towards the goal, and it will not fail. Though it tarries, wait for it will certainly come. It will not delay. So God's reassuring him it's not going to be immediate, but it's coming, make no mistake. My punishment will be swift, and it will come exactly as I want to. So your task, record the warning that those righteous men, those righteous individuals can heed it and prepare. We should get the lesson from that point there that God's justice is not on our timetable. God's justice arrives when He so chooses and He so wills. But make no mistake, God's justice will arrive. And it will be swift and it will be fierce. Now, we have the 5 woes here about the Chaldeans in the rest of the chapter. God reassures the prophet, make no mistake, these people are not innocent. I have not approved them. They have plenty to account for, and they will account for it. Starting in verse 4 there. Behold, as for the proud one, his soul is not right within him, but the righteous will live by his faith. Furthermore, wine betrays the haughty man, so he does not stay at home. He enlarges his appetite like Sheol, and he is like death, never satisfied. He also gathers himself all nations and collects himself all peoples. Will not all these take up a taunt song against him, even mockery and insinuations against him, and say, woe to him who increases what is not his, for how long, and makes himself rich with loans? Will not your collectors rise up suddenly, and those who collect from you awaken? Indeed, you will be plunder for them, because you have looted many nations. All the remainder of the peoples will loot you, because of human bloodshed and violence done to the land, to the town and all of its inhabitants. So the first woe is the fact that they have built their empire on blood guilt and oppression. They have come with the sword, pillaging and plundering and forced subjugation. Even in the ancient world, it was a harsh way that they chose to establish their empire. You compare that to the Greeks, for example. Alexander, he could care less about what the day-to-day life was in the inhabitant. Most of the time in the ancient world, so long as you paid taxes and didn't rebel, there was no problems. But there's always a few exceptions. Chaldeans were one of them. They came in pillaging, plundering, looting, taking slaves, torturing, burning cities. They're very much a marauding band instead of an empire. And so God says to them, woe to you. And he uses this analogy here. I mean, in a sense, they're borrowing this land, they're borrowing their power from others by forced subjugation. And they cannot sustain that method of conquest for long before everyone comes home to collect, before everyone rebels. Looking further on here, verse 9, woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to put his nest on high, to be delivered from the hand of calamity. You have devised a shameful thing for your house by cutting off many peoples, so you are sinning against yourself. Surely the stone will cry out from the wall, and the rafter will answer from its framework. The second woe, similar to the first. The first woe is a woe upon their lust for power and conquest. Their second woe is on how they came about that and how they conquered. Woe to your entire empire. By their method of conquest, they have brought shame and reproach, and they have brought death upon themselves. Verse 12. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and founds a town with violence. Is it not indeed from the Lord of hosts that peoples toil for fire and nations grow weary for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord, and the waters, as the waters cover the sea. They've shed innocent blood. They've gone beyond what's expected in conquest. They have founded entire cities upon slaughter. Indiscriminate massacres. The list continues. Verse 15. Woe to you who make your neighbors drink, who mix in your venom, even make them drunk, so as to look upon their nakedness. You will be filled with disgrace rather than honor. Now you yourself will drink and expose your own nakedness. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter disgrace will come upon your glory. The Bible and back God saying through the prophet here, you have violated these nations. You have absolutely violated these nations. You have spiked their drinks in order to take advantage. God's very explicit to what the Chaldeans were doing to these people. But as been the theme so far, he's saying, you may think you're going to get away with this, but it's you who are going to be taken advantage of. You will be exposed. You will be brought low and shamed. And then the final woe here, starting in verse 18. What profit is the idol when its maker has carved it? Or an image, a teacher of falsehood? For its maker trusts in his own handiwork when he fashions speechless idols. Woe to him, woe to him who says to a piece of wood, awake, to a mute stone, arise. And that is your teacher? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath at all inside it. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. The Chaldeans trusted in their false gods, and they used their false gods as basically taunts against the nations they conquered. And God saying through the prophet again, what is your gods? What are they? But wood and stone, covered with silver and gold. There's no breath inside them. They're not alive. Foolish is to trust in such a thing. And he contrasts that. You trust in these man-made things, but as for the Lord, he sits and he reigns in his temple. He is alive. And he judges righteously with his people and deals fairly with them. He is the true God that will bring about this destruction. Woe to your idolatry! What good are they who have been made with your own hands? And so the prophet gets his response about why God's using the Chaldeans. In fact, in God using the Chaldeans, he only hastens their demise. He uses them for righteous judgment upon Judah and their sins. And by doing so, as I said, brings them closer to their end. And so the book of Habakkuk ends actually with a psalm. A psalm of hope and of comfort in the midst of destruction. It starts out in the 3rd chapter with a petition for mercy. Lord, I have heard the report about you, and I fear. O Lord, revive your work in the midst of the years. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. The prophet understands finally why God is doing this, and so he just asks that in the midst of this that you would remember. Be merciful to those who are still with you. In the coming years after destruction, please bring about your works again. Make it known your righteousness again in the coming years. The prophet continues. He continues speaking about the great works, the judgments, and salvation of God in the past. Starting in verse 3, God comes from Teman, and the Holy One from Mount Paran. His splendor covers all the heavens, and the earth is full of his praise. His radiance is like the sunlight, his rays flashing from his hand. And there is the hiding of his power. Before him goes pestilence, and plague comes after him. He stood and surveyed the earth. He looked and startled the nations. Yes, the perpetual mountains were shattered. The ancient hills collapsed. His ways are everlasting. I saw the tents of Tucson under distress, and the curtains of the land of Midian were trembling. Did the Lord rage against the rivers? Or was your anger against the rivers? Or was your wrath against the sea? That you rode on your horses, on your chariots of salvation. Your bow was made bare. The rods of chastisement were sworn. You cleaved the earth with rivers. The mountains saw you and quaked. The downpour of water swept by. The deep uttered forth its voice. It lifted high its sands. Sun and moon stood in their places. They went away in the light of your arrows and the radiance of your gleaming spear. In indignation you marched through the earth. In anger you trampled the nations. You went forth for the salvation of your people, for the salvation of your anointed. You struck the head of the house of evil to lay him open from thigh to neck. Habakkuk goes back over the history. You have always been righteous in your judgments. You have done all these great things, and it's always been for the sake of your holy ones. It's always been for the sake of the people who follow after you. Even in the remnant, God was still acting on behalf of his people. We get that picture throughout the Old Testament. God has always been the faithful partner in the marriage, while Israel has gone out and played the harlot multiple times. But there's always been that remnant that comes back and never left. And Habakkuk is reminded again of this. You have done all this for the salvation of your people. You don't just annoy or win a few battles. You struck the head of the house of the evil to lay him open from thigh to neck. Reminded the words of the Hebrew writer, speaking of the saints there in the 11th chapter, some were torn asunder. That's what God did to the enemies of his people. Verse 14. You pierced with his own spears. The head of his throngs, they stormed in to scatter us. Their exultation was like those who devour the oppressed. Their exultation was like those who devour the oppressed in secret. You trampled on the sea with your horses, on the surge of many waters. I heard, and my inward parts trembled, and the sound of my lips quivered. Decay enters my bones, and in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress, for the people to arise who invade us. Though the fig tree should not blossom, and there be no fruit on the vines, though the yield of the olive should fail, and the fields produce no food, though the flock should be cut off from the fold, and there are no cattle in the stalls. Before this wraps up, the prophet says, I understand. You are God, and you are righteous, and you will exact your vengeance. Even though I must wait anxiously for that day, and even though I may have to go through famine and calamity, he says, yet I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he has made my feet like hinds' feet, and he makes me walk on my high places. It ends there with the absolute confidence in Jehovah. The absolute confidence. Despite all that's going to happen, I will still rejoice in the Lord. One writer had this to say about the prophet. The prophet had enumerated every avenue of food of particular to the Jews. And though all be taken away by the invader, he will continue to put his trust in Jehovah and to have joy in him. Here the peak of faith is reached. Here is the faith by which men live by. He had not seen. In fact, we know very little about the prophet. Perhaps he never got to see that day come. But he knew it would. Because of God's past action and how the character and nature of God, he knows it will take place. And he knows he is righteous and just in this action. And so, for us, we may look around and we may ask the same question. How long, O Lord, will I call for help and you will not hear? And God's answer may not be one we like. God may send Chaldeans. And we may be left questioning, how on earth are you using them? But it's like what the wisdom writer said in Ecclesiastes. Remember this, that when all has been heard, the conclusion is this, that every action will be brought to judgment, whether secret, hidden, or done in public. No matter what happens, no matter what we see, we may have all these questions about what is going on in the world, but we need to have the attitude and the same mind as the prophet. I may not understand it, Lord, but I know you are just and you are righteous. And you do all for the sake of your holy ones. And because of that, I will exult in the Lord. I will rejoice in his salvation. Doesn't mean it's going to be easy at times. I don't get the sense that the prophet was any less anxious or fearful for that day. Verse 16. And in my place I tremble, because I must wait quietly for the day of distress. But even despite that, even though he's in that position, he understands. This is God's will, and I will rejoice in it. He was one of the righteous ones. He was a child of God. He was in a right relationship with him. So even though calamity may struck him, even though he may have even lived to see the fall of Jerusalem and be carried away or killed in that conquest, he was right with God. No day is guaranteed. No moment of life is a given. If you're not in a right relationship with God, I seriously doubt if you can say, "Yet I will rejoice in the Lord of my salvation." Make him the God of your salvation this evening by repenting of your sins and putting on Christ in baptism, by being united with him in his death, burial, and resurrection, that you might become one of his righteous. That you might say like the prophet, "Yet I will exult in the Lord, the joy of my salvation." If we can help you this evening by being born as a child of God or being restored to the faith through prayers of restoration or give you prayers of strength, please come forward as we stand and sing the song of invitation.